Now another test that I really like is the genetics test. Now much of the genetics has been very nicely worked out here. So instead of running all these other tests, I would start with the genetic test because that's going to give you a very high probability of telling you what's going on with you. For a lot of conditions you can't do that yet, but for gluten sensitivity you can. So it's about 149 bucks and I highly recommend it. So that's my basic overview of testing and why if you come back with a negative blood test the job is not done. Thank you a lot for listening. Hope that's helpful. I'm Dr. Dan from Vitamin Pro, and I want to clear up a few things about testing for gluten sensitivity. The first thing I'll tell you is that there are two basic forms of gluten sensitivity. There's a celiac form, which has both symptomatic, intestinal symptomatic, and intestinal non-symptomatic. That means some gluten sensitive people are celiacs and they have obvious intestinal symptoms. You know, they eat something bad, they're in pain for a couple of days, sometimes longer, with obvious intestinal symptoms. And some people have celiac disease, they have the same issues as a celiac person, but they just don't have that kind of obvious symptom. And then there's another form, and that is a non-celiac type of gluten sensitivity, and these people usually present with autoimmune problems like osteoporosis, diabetes, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. You know, there's a long list there, so if I didn't include you, don't think that that's not you. Or neurological problems, such as ataxia, depression, ADHD, autism, that sort of thing. So, if you go to your medical doctor and they say, well, let's just run a blood test. And so they do this blood test for, and I just saw one just came across my desk today, it's transglutaminase, IgA, and IgG. And of course it comes back negative, which means that this person is most likely not celiac, but it doesn't address the other problem. Now about 5% of the people who are gluten sensitive have the celiac form, and the other 95% have autoimmune or neurological problems. The problem with the blood test is it only picks up a few of those gluten sensitive people. It doesn't pick up the bulk. Now if you really want to get to the root of the problem, you have to test where the antibodies are made. 95% of the antibodies are not made in the blood, they're made in the small intestine because that's the first line of defense. It makes a lot more sense than to do stool testing to test for those antibodies, not a blood test, because a blood test is going to miss most everybody. So if you suspect you might be gluten sensitive, but you had a negative blood test, that does not mean that you don't have the autoimmune or the neurological form. So just keep that in mind.